So this is the November 10th meeting of the Land Planning and Economic Development Task Force. And hello to everyone. Thank you for coming. Doesn't appear that we have anyone
60.
Waiting for privilege of the floor. We had a lurker who kept coming in and out who seems to have disappeared. So Mark and I were thinking that this person was not legit. So I thought maybe just to begin, we could quickly I want to rehearse a little bit of what happened at the town board meeting on Thursday. So the town board is following our attorney's advice, and we will be considering an extension of the moratorium. We should have language for that at our agenda meeting December 1st, and then the plan is to further consider it and hold a public hearing at the business meeting on December 9th and ideally take a vote that evening. The moratorium expires on December 10th. And I think my plan is for the work of this task force then to have been completed. We'll see how we can do, but I'd like the report submitted to the board, ideally December 1st, if not December 9th, so that the report can weigh in on the decision also to extend the moratorium. Although that will also happen because we won't have approved the revised comprehensive plan yet. So that's just going to have to happen anyway. But in terms of our progress, it will help. I think it will help delineate the parameters of the nature of a moratorium, what it's for, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what happened on the board front. Any questions about that, Ellen?
Is there a duration being proposed?
That's under consideration. That's still under consideration. I think probably another 6 months at this stage would be the idea. But I don't want to speak for the board because I haven't seen the language but that's likely to be the case. And that's extremely legally defensible, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what we're shooting for, and then we'll just have to see what goes from there. So I thought to begin with, if you don't have any more questions about that, and I'm sorry, I just don't have much more detail to give to you because it's all we've actually asked our attorney to prepare the language for the moratorium resolution. So he's working on that. In order for us to wrap up, and when we're able to wrap up, I think it would be helpful to, as Greg mentioned in an email, to provide a written report to the board. It doesn't have to be voluminous. We have the voluminous comprehensive plan for everybody to read, but I think it can provide our pressure points and justifications. And so, Greg, did you just want to briefly say something about that? And then I'd like to jump right into the design standards. And then no matter how far along we are into the design standards, I'd like to shift at 8:30 to start to talk about zoning options, so we can have that on the table because we'll need to discuss them in the following week. And Greg can lead us in that. But just, do you want to talk about the report a little bit, Greg?
I don't have much to say. No. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the subcommittees can craft paragraphs for the report. The design committee obviously has already done all of its work because obviously what it's going to do is present its revisions, which is a hefty amount of work. The Formula Business Committee provided a small report, and that'll probably either get expanded a little bit or be what it is. And then the Economic Review Committee, you guys, I can't remember if you provide anything in writing or not. I'm sorry, I didn't go back and look at my notes.
Yeah, it was extensive writing that they provided.
Sorry. So we can just, Greg can just kind of get that in a form where we then can consider it all together. Does that sound like a plan? Okay, let's dive right in. Barb, are you going to lead the charge again? Or who's going to share their screen, I guess is the question.
Michelle has her hands up.
I have a question. I have a question, not to share.
I just got did you get that email just now from somebody? Why? Is that?
Usman is having trouble getting in because
Yeah,
his computer's slow.
Okay,
Okay, so I just wanted to point that out.
thank you. I didn't see that because I don't have the town email open.
He basically said he's having trouble. Please go ahead without him.
Okay, fine. We'll catch up and it's going to be recorded so you can see it. Who's going to share their screen? For the, Ellen, do you want me to do that? Okay.
Be fine. And what do you want me to have up? The proposed design standards?
Well, now.
The design standards.
Yeah, the design standards. We finished the site plan, right? We went through it all, yes.
We went through the law. There are still a few revisions that need to be made or added in, but that's not ready yet.
Okay. Yeah, well, let's jump into the design standards.
Okay.
So, Greg, you and I have not talked about this, but you were kind of the lead on the design standards. Do you want to walk people through that, or how would you like to do this?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. Since I was the last to work on these. So yeah, if that's appropriate, I can do that.
Okay.
And then I can comment too. Since the subcommittee didn't see, there were a couple things that I deleted, and maybe the subcommittee had noticed some of those things, and I think a couple things that I'd added as well. But certainly, so let's start up at the top. So I think.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to share my screen.
You know, I can, Ellen, I'm happy to share my screen too.
And
Yeah.
Greg, I made you a co-host so you can share your screen easily.
Very good.
I'm gonna do that. Great.
All right, can everyone see my Word document? All right, great. So we'll just kind of run through here. Things in red and strikeout are well, things in red are what are different. And then items in strikeout text are things that were from the previous law, design guideline, excuse me. So, and hopefully everyone got a chance to see these, that at the very end of this document are all the former guidelines. So the thought was, and then maybe there's a table of contents that could go in here, but I kind of decided just to leave that out for now. The thought that I had was to break off certain real building and site elements from the original design guidelines. And so beginning with building placement and design, and the one thing that we had talked about, so I'll just go through these. So the first one is that a building must not front directly on existing public roads to maintain rural character and vehicular design. If you all remember, at one of our meetings, we discussed hamlets and how maybe in hamlets, such as this picture of Brookton's, the Brookton's market, that maybe we should encourage buildings to be a little bit closer. I opted to leave language about that out of these design guidelines. I think just without zoning, it's a little bit difficult. We're getting a little bit too nuanced to be delineating areas that should have different regulations versus those that do not. So I left that language out. I think for where Caroline is currently, they have to treat kind of all areas of the town equally that aren't otherwise identified in some other local law, such as, for instance, a floodplain law. You know, a floodplain is clearly identified in state and federal agencies, and the town could adopt law and say there are certain restrictions on these floodplains that are different from places that are outside the floodplains. So, so that's the only, I think, area that comes to my mind where maybe the town could delineate certain areas. But absent zoning, I think it's just difficult to do that. And I know that I had floated some ideas about maybe we could just talk about the hamlets in the comprehensive plan, but I'm going to maintain the conservative route and say we should just not recommend that. So that's how it looks for now. That can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and we'll see, and hopefully you all did get a chance to look at these. Some of these standards are strict, and then others are a little bit more flexible. So please feel free, and actually, oh yeah, so Ellen has a question, and maybe Tim, if you could help out, I'll try to look at the everyone, but if someone has something, maybe just jump in and yell at me. So Ellen, looks like you had a question.
I understand why you're feeling that these should address the town as a whole. My question is, if we do in the future adopt zoning and we want to allow buildings to front directly on the existing public road in a hamlet, then this would need to be changed, right? Which is not undoable, and that's part of why we're doing it as these kind of standards rather than a law, but does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ellen brings a good point that, yeah, that possibly, and I think we had brought this up even a few meetings ago, that if there were to be zoning, that this site plan and the site plan review would go within that. Site plan review would get looked at again. It doesn't mean that the time spent on the site plan review is wasted. It's a very good effort as just a committee to look at this and how to update it to the new comprehensive plan. So, but yes, Ellen, I think that, you know, without splitting hairs here and getting too much into the weeds, you know, it could be something where there could be a separate hamlet design guideline manual, and then it just applies to. And that's often where design guidelines apply. They're historic districts or hamlets, for example, and in industrial areas. So yeah, there could certainly be a similar to this, a hamlet design manual for the town of Caroline. So, and I can only see a few of you. Actually, let me just try to see if I can see everyone here.
I've got
Okay.
everybody. I've got everybody, Greg.
All right, good. And I think I've got everyone here too.
Yasmin's here, so welcome, Yasmin.
Hey, Usman. All right, and I'll go kind of quick, and just if there are any other questions. So this is a fairly, you know, the architectural design and details of proposed buildings or structures must be compatible with the character of the surrounding area, considering scale and type of construction and landscaping. Building entrances. So I added entrances into building placement and design. Building entrances should be clearly defined and scale with building facade, relate to the public realm, and have weather cover. Public realm is kind of a jargony planning term, but it really just means anything that the public is allowed to be within. Just note that, you know, some of these topics can be expanded on or subtracted from, and I won't go into kind of the nuanced detail of that, but I mean, building placement could be its own its own design guideline, and building design could be its own sort of subsection. But this is just to give an idea, you know, of the sort of groupings. So roofing shall have a minimum pitch of 4 and 12. For those of you who aren't familiar with this term, this means 4 inches vertical for every 12 inches horizontal. So this roof down here might be, it's probably more than 4 and 12, or maybe it's 5 and 12. I don't know. It looks a little steep.
Yeah.
For-
So quickly, what's the rationale behind the roof pitch? I mean,
Yeah,
using it
yeah.
for snow, but I mean, why not have a shallow roof? Is there a design reason for that in terms of the appearance for the town?
Sure. Well, yeah, and maybe this does want to be modified. I threw this number in there because this is a fairly typical number to have for roof pitch. Flat roofs are often a little bit, they can, you know, it really comes down to the values of the town and kind of what maybe the town wants. But from what I heard earlier in our conversations, some of the concerns for commercial design pointed to having more of flat roofs and kind of boxier looking structures. And so requiring a minimum pitch of a roof is certainly an allowed practice for design guidelines.
Mhm.
Looks like Bar-
Well, it does eliminate the possibility of a green roof, for example.
Huh.
Or putting solar collectors on a roof is somewhat more difficult. You can still do it on a pitched roof, of course, but so yeah, it's somewhat problematic.
Okay.
I was just going to say that I think that this came up because it followed the design guidelines of a lot of the other design standards that we looked at, not only in Tompkins County, but I remember in Vermont, in California. So it's kind of a standard approach to helping to define an area aesthetic. Ellen?
I think Barbara's bringing up a good point. And could it not then have, unless a special dispensation is going because of the green roof, the installation of the green roof or, collector panels. So you could allow it to be done, but only for those reasons or for environmental reasons.
Barb?
Do we know what pitch is the minimum or maximum you can have for solar panels?
I don't think it's a big deal for solar panels. I mean,
Right.
they have roof mounting stuff. I mean, if the pitch isn't facing south, it gets to be more complicated. But we could talk to one of the solar developers. I think that's not an issue. I think the green roof is more of an issue. And I, like Ellen's, a citizen of an escape clause saying minimum pitch of 412 unless, a green roof or some other good reason. But I mean, basically, that's a green roof design is.
Yeah.
And we can get confirmation from the solar developer. But I know when we're looking at our house, they had various schemes for how they would deal with our different roof pitches, and they were fine with it. It was going to cost money, but it
Right.
wasn't impossible.
Okay.
Ken, did you have your hand up?
Yes, just because you've got a picture of a peaked roof doesn't mean that the 412 can't be from front to back. And some of that pitch is, in my estimation, is good for a winter climate like we have, so that snow can slide off it.
Right.
And I question the number 2 there. I'm not sure what corrugated metal is. If it's a metal roof, I don't see the problem with that.
Yeah.
Corrugated may mean different than what I think of as a metal roof.
Good question on the corrugated metal. That would be actually, interestingly, all of these examples that I added to the design standards document, all these pictures, have examples where they wouldn't meet the actual design standards. So Brookton's Market is relatively a flat roof. And then the Speedsville store, I would say that is probably a corrugated metal. I can't really tell from the picture, but corrugated metal looks essentially like a corridor. Yeah, like
Valleys.
yeah.
Yeah. But it's vernacular. If there are examples in the town, particularly in older architecture, why
not allow it?
Why not allow it?
Sure. Maybe what I'm hearing is that maybe the roofing section needs to either just be eliminated or modified. I do want to say a point on green roofs. They don't work as well as, unless anybody has some compelling evidence that they want to provide me, they don't work as well as their lofty kind of words sound. They are extremely energy intensive just to get up and running. They require a lot of water. I think in this climate, they might work better. But there was a proposal in, well, I'm not going to go into it further, but they can be more trouble and expense than are really actually worth. They might be appropriate on a roof of 100,000 square feet, you know, if a Walmart were to set up in town, you know, but on a 2,000 square foot roof, I'm not sure that it would be worth it, but maybe.
I'd like to lobby for keeping a minimum pitch in with exceptions.
I agree.
Because I
I
think that
agree.
there are a lot of, there's a big rationale for doing so.
But on the corrugated metal roofing, I mean, if that's like the galvanized, you know, corrugated S-shaped stuff, I agree that looks ugly. But there are a lot of newer aluminum metal roofs that are quite durable, as Ken was pointing out. So it does depend whether corrugated, what that means, because there are metal roofs, they're cost effective, they're long lasting. I don't happen to like them or use them, but I see why people do. So that number two might need more investigation, is what my advice would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michelle?
No, I was going to say, I know lots of people that like standing seam metal roofs
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to corrugated. That's different from corrugated. I understand that. But a lot of people like metal roofs, especially in northern climates. And a lot of people like the way they look, actually. Speaking, knowing a couple of architects that were, anyway. So, yeah.
If the corrugated is what, if the corrugated is what I think it is, it's up and down, up and down, up and down, instead of over a ridge, a flat part, over a ridge, a flat part, over a ridge.
Yeah.
And I don't, so a corrugated roof, I wouldn't particularly like, but a nice metal roof I have one on my new shed, and I think it's beautiful. But I would just call it a metal roofing material.
Yeah,
Thanks.
one of the things to specify might be standing seam metal is fine, but corrugated metal is discouraged.
Standing seam metal. Okay, I've never heard that term. So, okay. As you can see, these standards can get very they can get very picky, and I just kind of threw that one out there. This wasn't there was no precedent to this. This was just based off of kind of hearing thoughts about certain kind of gaudy design that had come up for certain commercial developments. But I guess for right now, I can add exceptions in here, sort of if what I'm thinking is that if this pitch cannot be met, I mean, there might just be kind of this might just be more of a, I mean, it might just be more of a looser standard. I mean, you know, kind of providing an out for every standard sort of defeats the purpose of a standard. So, you know, it could be just one of the, you know, terms of it's encouraged to have a minimum pitch of, you know, 4 and 12 or 2 and 12 even, or leaving it at, I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is that flat roofs aren't necessarily, despised, that the people don't have necessarily an issue with flat roofs. And so maybe it's,
Well, I think
disagree.
you heard from a couple of us at least that that it should require a pitch.
okay.
Now, whether that pitch needs to be 412 or could be 312 or 212, you know, is an open question. But I think what you're hearing is it should have a pitch unless given a specific exception for, you know, environmental or sustainability or energy reasons.
Barbara, I would actually, you know, I think rather than should have, encouraged to have, I think would be somewhat more, you know, give people the flexibility.
I mean, we have to remember that we're talking about commercial business
Yeah.
design here. which is really different from domestic design. And I mean, I would still try to maintain a line that the town might want to have preference for a certain aesthetic that might preclude cookie cutter
Right.
boxes, which is
Agree with you.
what I think we've heard
Yeah.
from the town.
Okay. So maybe for now.
The other point here with the pitch, I definitely think it has to have a pitch in this area.
Yeah.
But now what happens when you look down the street or across the street and every one of them has a flat roof? Just supposing. Then you're not following the first section there.
Right,
If you have a,
but that's only for new construction. So anything existing is
no, I
grandfathered
know
in.
that. I know
Okay.
that. I understand that part. What I'm saying is, you're saying in all of what we've been doing, okay, look at what's adjacent to us, and you should be doing something close to similar whatever. So I don't know how you do the two. Have a peaked roof
Mhm.
on your building, and all the rest down the street have a pitch of 312, and go from front to back, so it almost looks like a flat roof. And I don't understand how you do number 2 here. I think it is
Yeah, it's a good.
above.
That's a very good point, Ken. It could be something where this standard is expanded on to say to include sort of a few or statements, such as materials or roofing or color, sort of or like sort of listing a bunch of design elements that need to be compatible in at least one of these regards. This idea of compatibility is fairly loose, and it can be interpreted. There's no quantifiable standard here, and so the review board can take this however
Understand.
way that they might need to take it. They can say, if it's a boxy building next to a bunch of peaked roofed buildings, they might say it's not compatible, but it doesn't meet the standard. If it's the other way around, they might be able to say that as well. But maybe the building has similar materials. Maybe it has similar color. It might have similar fenestration and canopies and balconies, or just different sort of architectural features that might sort of tie into the area. That might say overall, cumulatively, it is compatible with the surrounding area. But I think it's a very good point. And so I could certainly.
If you drive around the town, which I've done, and take photographs of the commercial structures that we have, geez, pretty much I think all of them have pitched roofs and certain configurations that are rather compatible. So I can see this fitting into an overall design scale. Maybe the only ones that don't are the firehouses.
And I'm just reading a little bit here that anything less than 2 to 12 or even 2 to 12 is considered essentially flat, but is sometimes used, again, to provide drainage. So I think we would want to be specifying 3 to 12 or 4 to 12 as the minimum, whether the minimum is required or encouraged. I would opt for required, except, unless it's specifically accepted, given the review board decision. Again, because what we're trying to do is to not have a bunch of essentially flat roofed cookie cutter buildings throughout town.
Okay, so for right now, I'm hearing general consensus to leave this in a shall statement, a pitch. I'll leave it at 4 and 12. That is a fairly standard pitch.
Yep.
And then I'll leave this in an exception for environmental or energy reasons. I'll probably wordsmith that a little bit. Going back to this, maybe I'll just eliminate that. It sounds like this is maybe not as much of a concern. The corrugated metal roofing. That maybe it's okay. I see one thumbs up. Maybe not. All consensus. Okay, there's some consensus here. No objections. All right, I'll just get rid of that. And if you have any other thoughts, I'll look up standing seam metal too and just kind of grab my head up, see what that's all about. Let's keep moving down and maybe just jot some notes if you have any other thoughts. Massing. Buildings that are larger than a footprint of 1,500 square feet must be designed as a series of smaller masses or design components. We had looked at this last time. Are there any other thoughts on this?
Just grammar.
Is there any number of, say, masses that a 1,500 square foot should have as compared to 3,000 square foot?
Good question.
Ken, can you just repeat that first part of the question? I was looking for some grammatical mistakes in this sentence. You said
Okay.
Right,
If
Greg, I'll
you
send them
had
to
two
you.
buildings, if you had two buildings and one is 1,500 square feet and the other is 3,000, should one have two masses and the other with four masses? Is there something that we should say based on square feet? Every 1,500 square feet should have at least one mass per 1,500 square feet,
it's a good
or
question.
whatever's appropriate.
The way that I read this, and as somebody who has seen many development plans, this can be interpreted by an architect in a few different ways. Essentially what it reads is that if you have something that's over 1,500 square feet, it has to just look somewhat like two separate buildings. And whether that's through a series of different materials, roofing, colors, fenestration, there's a lot of, I'm not an architect, but there are a lot of ways that architects can get very creative. If a standard says anything over 1,500 square feet needs to be designed as a series of smaller masses, it gets the idea that the town has a standard of maybe 1,500 square feet, and as a commercial building, and anything more than that needs to be broken up a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'd leave it up to the
Okay.
review board to review the architect's drawings and see if it met the idea. I agree. Trying to specify more detail might be difficult,
Yeah.
but good question, Ken.
Okay. I don't see any. All right. Materials. Materials should be consistent with traditional Caroline building design, including the use of clapboard, shingle, and board and batten. I had removed upstate New York, which I think this one came originally from Town of Danby's design guidelines, and I removed the reference to the upstate New York as that was a comment for the site plan review. And so then all right, Ken, you got a question?
Does vinyl or aluminum siding fit in that group?
It does not. And so aluminum would fit here with metal. Vinyl, good question. It would not fit anywhere. So, I'm not even certain what vinyl material looks like. I'm just going to do a quick search of that.
Well, it's like clapboard, only clapboard to me is a board.
Yeah, a lot of houses
wood.
have vinyl siding.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
I don't think we would have any problem including vinyl in this.
Okay.
Probably right, everybody?
or
Yeah.
cement board.
But I would, yeah, you're going to be including it up in number 1.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So then moving on down to the second one, sort of to juxtapose, is that stone, masonry block, brick, metal, and modern stucco is allowed on up to 30% of the public facade. This is going to be purely a value-based standard. You know, this is what does the town want? Often, you know, I was surprised to see that brick, the use of brick actually came from Danby's standards, and Danby had said that brick is discouraged. Where I've ever worked, brick has always been encouraged.
Yeah, but
So
that's because you worked in Colorado and Denver burned down, and so that there's a law in Denver that you have to use brick.
maybe that's the reason. So, but this is just going to be a value, sort of understanding here. Yeah, Michelle. Oh, yeah.
Well, this is just a question. So you're discouraging the use of modern stucco, is that right?
It's just that it shouldn't be used on all of the facade.
Because have you noticed the, well, you know, the houses that, the Boise-Ville houses, a lot of those are stucco. And I noticed he's built another one on the corner going down Ellis Hollow Road, right close to 79. The whole thing looks to me like stucco. I'm just curious, have you seen it? Or, I actually don't live in my area. But you know what I'm just wondering about your comment on that, because that I think is like he's, you know, he's trying to be quaint by using that.
Yeah, stucco is becoming a much more widely used material for residential houses.
Yeah.
So
So
this,
why would you not allow that for 100%?
again, this I don't have any white paper to back this up. This is just I think this was taken from Danby standards, and I didn't add that specifically in there.
Okay.
So what I did add, for everyone just to understand, I did add the 30% of a public facing facade, because some of our discussions were talking about the amount of material on a public facing facade. And so again, that number could be 50%, it could be 10%. We don't even need to say that in there. It could just say, you know, only, it just can't be 100%. You could say something like 100% of the facade cannot just be one material. It needs to be 2 materials. I mean, it can be very creative with kind of how these look. I just,
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about limiting stone and brick in the sense that those are, I think, energy efficient, sustainable kind of building materials, and limiting stucco in the sense that more buildings are using stucco. I mean, I could see not wanting to have a plethora of masonry block buildings or metal buildings, you know, purely metal buildings throughout the town. But stone, brick, and stucco, I'm a little bit concerned that this is too limiting.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I
I
would agree also.
I have a concern that would we be discouraging architecturally innovative solutions?
yeah, that's a good question, Barbara. That's always the balance of regulating these types of private property rights.
And I mean, I just point our attention to the fact that we're talking about commercial facades and not domestic facades. And I mean, I think that personally, I think that the stone and brick and probably stucco, taking those out is a good idea, because I mean, there are a lot of stone facades in this area. But I could see a reason for the town to want to restrict masonry block,
And metal.
metal, and and say pre-stressed concrete, something like that, to 30% of the facade. Because if you had it everywhere, there would be no variation whatsoever, and it wouldn't be aesthetic. I could see that.
Is there a difference between masonry block and concrete masonry units?
A little bit. There is so I'm trying to go back to when it was referenced in other zoning ordinances or other ordinances, but there are differences in concrete units and concrete blocks. Some might be called smooth face concrete blocks. Others are just called concrete blocks. But yes, there are differences in concrete units, and so this concrete masonry unit, I think, yeah, and maybe it should be elaborated a little bit, but and maybe I could just pull up a picture. But smooth face concrete units would be what you'd see. There are some commercial buildings going up that are just concrete blocks, and
or prefab walls, prefab
Yeah.
concrete walls, right?
Right.
So okay, I guess what I'm hearing is that maybe stone, maybe stone masonry block and brick, and you said modern stucco, maybe you should just go up in the.
Well, masonry block
Okay.
is, if I understand what masonry block is, I mean, I would think we'd want to keep that on the exclusionary list.
I mean, I think of masonry block as sort of cinder block, right? I think we're
Yeah.
or similar. So I would agree. I think what Tim was suggesting is that stone, brick, and modern stucco be removed from this limitation, since indeed stone is commonly used as a facing material. There are stone houses around. That's what I think Tim suggested earlier, and I'm in favor of that.
So it might be more clear to remove the masonry terminology and just refer to cement, cinder, and concrete blocks.
Are prohibited.
Yeah, cement, cinder, and concrete block construction is
Block.
are prohibited on the public facing facade.
I'm
All right.
wondering, Barb, if we wouldn't also want to say blocks and units, because that might.
Sure,
Units
sure.
might include prefab walls.
Sure. Yep.
Unless I'm mistaken, I think cement and concrete are the same thing, but
No,
no? All right.
I mean, there is a difference whether it's important in this context. I don't know, but yes, there's a difference between cement and concrete. It has to do with the binder.
Okay.
So number 2 is being changed. We're going to
Should it-
eliminate stone, we're going to eliminate brick, and we're going to eliminate modern stucco and potentially move them up above. Or just not talk about them, right?
Yeah, you could just not even say anything about
yeah,
them.
That's fine. So does that just leave metal
Yes.
up to 30% of a facade, or a
That's
minor,
fine.
you could say a minor component or whatever, then we don't have 30%.
Sure, just as a,
Is allowed as a minor component on the public facade.
are there other thoughts on that?
Well, a minor component, I think, would be interpreted as less than 50%.
Exactly. And I don't know that 30% is magic. So I'm happy with less than 50%, but
Yeah, it's not necessarily magic. I just kind of shot for a number as it's, but so I could say that metal is it's allowed up to is allowed as a minor component.
As a minor component of the public facade.
Oh, I cannot type tonight. I'm sorry. Okay, and I'll kind of go back through here too.
Michelle, you have your hand up?
I do have my hand up. Yeah, I don't mean to be extra nitpicky here, but somebody mentioned hardy board earlier. So are you included? And that's a that's a fiber cement product, but you're including that as clapboard. Is that right? Because it looks like wood, hardy
Mhm.
board. But that's considered very durable. A lot of people, I've considered hardy board myself. It's very attractive and durable, and it's using cement. It's better actually than vinyl. Vinyl siding is really terrible for the environment.
I know
Mhm.
someone who wants to put it on the town hall.
Vinyl?
No, hardy board.
Oh, hardy board. Yeah, everybody's using hardy board.
Good stuff.
I'm just saying it's great. It's expensive.
Where would
But-
it fall in this?
It's what?
Where would it come in 1, 2, or 3? Or
I
would-
I'm not sure. It's cement. That's the thing. That's my question. It's a
Right.
cement product.
I mean, so I think, building materials are changing and changing all the time. As Greg said, you don't want to necessarily preempt innovative solutions.
Right,
I mean, if
right.
it looks like clapboard, I think that's fine. I agree. We mentioned cement down there, but it's cement
Okay.
blocks and units. I don't know if you call hardy board that or not. That's a good question. But if it can like look, or things that look like the things in number 1 are fine. I think that's the bottom line. Am I right?
Okay. So well, you know, you are separating out vinyl siding from. Anyway, I don't want to exclude any good materials here, and that's my main point.
Mhm.
So you can just add harding board, you know, use of clapboard, comma, hardy board, HARDIE.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go.
Well, it's 2 words. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think yeah, this is good. Just to delineate this out, and this is what I really wanted to do. Design standards that I've applied. Sorry, Michelle, what was that?
I said maybe it's capitalized. Maybe that's why it's showing.
Oh,
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, it is capitalized.
Yeah.
H,
The
capital
capitalized-
okay. Yeah,
Whatever. But yeah. But anyway.
hardier board. Yeah.
No.
It probably wants to do hardy boys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's a good series. Great
And
series.
there may be a generic word for that hardy board
everybody calls
being a
it-
brand name.
I'm planning a renovation. That's why I'm familiar with this. So,
I will,
and I have 2 architects working on it.
what I'll do is just make sure. I mean, just to see if maybe there's a simpler way to say if some of these can include the other. I'll just kind of go through if vinyl siding can be included in on one of these. But
And I'm going to second something. I mean, this was if something looks like, you know, board and batten and shingle or clapboard, but isn't necessarily made out of wood, we think that's okay. This is an appearance standard.
Right.
So that's how I would, if you can
So-
word it that way.
Yes.
I mean, it says the materials should be consistent with, including the use of. So it should be okay.
Okay.
and appearance of
Right.
or appearance of. So, I mean, it could be something to that effect. Some material, yeah, okay. I think what I'm generally hearing though is that these types of things and looks of them are okay. Metal might be okay, but just keep it minimal. And then cement, cinder, and concrete masonry blocks and units are prohibited. So this is good, and this is the intent of design standards, is to say what's generally acceptable, and then or what's very acceptable and what's not, what's prohibited. In a previous place that I worked, we didn't specifically say T111 siding is prohibited, but we would veer people away from T111 siding. It's a type of sort of very cheap siding that is used on industrial buildings. And so often it's just having a conversation with the developer about, just showing, examples of what the town has, and, different types of materials. So. Okay, let's move on down. We have about half an hour left to go through this. Fenestration. Public facing facades shall have a window area of at least 15% of the facade. Windows shall be real functional clear glass windows with views into the building or an internally lit display area. windows should be arranged in group between 2 and 10 feet above the finished exterior grade. Any comments, questions?
So they're not allowed to go down to the ground?
Usually they wouldn't, because there's going to be a base of the building. So there's typically 3 parts of the building, which is the foundation, sort of the middle section, and then the roofing section. Obviously there are,
Post office there, don't the windows go down to the ground?
yeah, that looks like the entrance. And so I was going to say that often doors and entrances have that. I doubt those do. I could be wrong.
So the ones on the entrance wouldn't be considered windows? They would to me.
Now you can get creative here, or architects can, and say that the door is not considered a window, but everything that is not used as a door is considered a window.
I guess what I'm asking partly is why do we care whether they start 2 feet above the ground? And does the 10 feet mean they can't go 10 feet higher than the ground? Or that's where they can start? I don't think I understand number 2.
Sure, it's good to go over this. Again, this is another kind of value-based standard. So this is typical. These thresholds, 2 and 10 feet. Yes, to answer your second question, I think, Ellen, is that it's saying between 2 feet above ground and 10 feet above ground, that's where the window should go. And this 15% of the facade might look at the entire facade, but that the window should go in this sort of delineated area of 2 and 10 feet. So this number can be altered, and certainly this number can be altered or eliminated altogether. This also was in the last, seems to be a common threshold though for pedestrian scale buildings. And so maybe this is something that's looked at further in a future Hamlet kind of design manual, if that's of interest. But 2 and 10 feet is generally a pedestrian scale style of design. So maybe it doesn't need to be in there. I mean, maybe it just needs to say, or maybe people would be comfortable with, hey, the public facing facade should have 15 or 20% or 30% windows, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, I like number 1, but number 2, I think that's too constraining.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Any other thoughts before I delete it? All right, it's eliminated. Without eliminating that, I think I'll have to go back through this. Okay, are folks okay with the 15%? I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Moving on down, canopies. This generally relates to. I have this picture of the Speedsville, but that's more of like an entrance. Canopy would be for a drive-through facility like a bank or a fast food restaurant. So a drive-through or drive-under canopies, typically associated with gas stations, should draw on the design traditions of the town of Caroline. Canopies should have a pitched roof. Canopy supports should be visually proportional to the roof structure. I believe that all of these came from Danby's design standards.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen.
Would it make sense to somehow say that the canopy should be consistent with the design of the rest of the building or the rest of the buildings on site?
Yes, certainly, and yeah, it's very appropriate to add into the design standards. This number 3 is starting to get at that.
Right.
So if a building was made of brick, let's say, and then it had metal support beams for the canopy, the review board might be able to say, well, the canopy supports you're proposing are metal, and they should be visually proportional or visually, maybe even adding visually designed.
Okay, because that's what I was going to say. This 3 is just simply refers to the roof structure. And I think we should want it to somehow be visually related to the whole structure.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with saying that the canopy itself should somehow fit with the building design, right? Be consistent with the
Mhm.
building design.
Yeah,
I only think of one drive under canopy in town, which is probably the Dandy Mini Mart. They actually,
yeah.
and that's probably totally flat and totally doesn't fit with the building, but I'm not sure.
I think that's right.
But you know, they're grandfathered, so.
Good, well put.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other?
On
Ken?
that uh, canopy there, if you take a look at the Danby, okay, the building that you have, page 4, to me, they have a sidewalk there, and I feel that the canopy should extend out over that sidewalk.
I'm sorry,
So
where-
when you park and it's raining and you walk, you won't walk on the sidewalk and be soaking wet.
I have a couple questions.
Yes,
Ken,
it's
where
that.
are you referring to, or what picture are you referring to?
Well, page 4, Dandy Store.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
Keep
you're
going. That's over there in Speedsville.
is it this one here?
That's the
You're referring to?
Speedsville General. Store. Keep going.
Dandy Mart.
There we go.
Okay.
See, there's a sidewalk there in front of the truck and the people are on it.
Right.
I think a canopy should extend out over the sidewalk to the front. I mean, they have a door on both sides of that vestibule there, but at least I don't know how you want to say that, but maybe nobody likes that idea. I think it's a darn good idea, just because it's mine, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, Ken, that is a good idea. And just if the committee, if there's consensus on this, I think where it would go is not in the canopy section again, because this is actually for gas stations and other things, but it would probably go into building placement and design. It could be something along the lines of walkways that are adjacent to a building should have an all weather cover over them.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Whatever. You kind of said that over the entrance on
Mhm.
Yeah.
where this is right there.
It's a really
Right, so
good.
now he's adding something about the walkway to the entrance, which is what Ken,
Okay.
your point was too.
Yeah.
Because I agree, the canopy section as written is to drive through canopies, and of course that sidewalk at Sladeville is not that. So this, I agree with Greg, this is a good place to put
Right.
something like that.
Great.
I'll wordsmith that a little bit. All right, I'm gonna keep moving down. Any other thoughts on canopies? And yeah, there aren't many examples in there's just the Dandy Mini Mart, which doesn't it's completely it looks very different. I'll just scroll down. It looks very different than this building. If you notice, I cleverly cropped it out of the photo. But
I'm sorry.
I mean, that's okay. I mean, it's unfortunate. I wish we had the design standards 20 years ago, but that's why we're doing it now, right? To try to prevent that sort of thing happening in the future.
Right.
I'm sorry, that's the Dandy Mart.
That's,
Yes.
but that's just a canopy over the entrance. That's not a drive-through.
No, but Greg cropped out the part that's over the pumps. That's what he's saying, because indeed it doesn't fit with the building, right? It's the kind of example we wouldn't want to have in the design guidelines. Unless, some design guidelines, of course, have anti-examples.
Right. I think it's great to have added the pictures. And I wonder if one could take one of the Speedsville store when it wasn't raining, because it looks so
hey,
already a depressing looking building.
well, I don't think we're necessarily in a rush to get propose these to the town board. So I mean, certainly if somebody wants to go, and I just decided to use Caroline examples, but I could always use non-Caroline examples. Maybe there's a benefit to doing that, or certainly if someone wants to update these photos and provide a nice sunny day with children playing outside and all the nice, good heart. You know.
What
The
is that
the
picture
next time
showing?
it's sunny, I'll drive back over there and take a different picture.
But what is this picture?
The thing,
It's not
Uh,
a,
Ellen, are you asking what does it refer to?
yeah, I mean, what is it supposed to be showing us that we do or do not want?
It's good question. I don't. I mean, I think for me, when I see it, it's adding to just the portfolio of Caroline's commercial examples.
Well,
Another way to organize this that I had thought about is maybe putting the pictures all on the first 1 or 2 pages and saying, here's Caroline. And I originally, I had a section called existing, non-residential structures in the town of Caroline. And I put all the pictures out, and maybe that's a way to do that.
well, I would question that why we would want that. I mean, to me, that pictures we show, the fact that we have these things and we have the Dandy Mart, which has its problems, and we have this building, which has its problems, I'm not sure why we would want to show them. These are things that are grandfathered and they're going to be there. I would think what we would want to be showing is what we desire or what we don't like. And that may not be in the buildings that we currently have because we don't have that much commercial. So I think I favor the idea of perhaps using examples from elsewhere if they show what we want. But I don't see a reason to show the things in Caroline if they aren't what we want.
That's a good thought. And so let's put that to the group. And
I guess I'd say when possible, use Caroline examples. I would probably remove the picture of the Speedsville General Store because frankly, it's kind of what I don't think is the ideal for Caroline. It's got a double pitched roof, kind of slopey, and it just, it doesn't look, it looks a little run down. But then again, I had to dress up the town hall to put on the cover of the comp plan with some Photoshop magic. But at any rate, other than that, most of the pictures seem fine. Other than, I do question the EV station picture, since we now talked about cinder block and cement block, the facade of the, though it's the side facing facade, I admit, of the community center is also maybe not the example we want to give. So maybe a picture that just shows the charging station better and not so much of the building would be appropriate there. That's my 2 cents.
it's a good thought. It is a community center and it might be exempt from site plan review, I believe.
Well, regardless.
Sure.
The document is supposed to be the designs that we would like to see in the town.
It's a good point. So does anybody have any heartburn about me eliminating Speedsville Store? Oh, Michelle, you have a question.
Yeah, I don't care if you eliminate Speedsville Store because it's not a nice building, but I think it's an interesting question because we're trying to put out design standards that follow the guidelines of what's in Caroline, right? We eliminated the upstate New York thing, and it's be following. I mean, if I'm a developer and I read something that says, you have to follow the aesthetic of Caroline, I think you have to be objective about what that aesthetic is. I don't think we can start having like what we want Caroline to look at. I think if we're going to follow with what's here, with the aesthetic that's here, I mean, I guess it's a philosophical.
I guess I disagree. I mean, I partially agree. That's why I say Caroline examples when possible, but it doesn't mean we have to give, because certain things in Caroline are the way they are, but that doesn't mean that's the design aesthetic that is reasonable, that even the bulk of the town represents. So, like some of these self-storage units, the one on 79, I wish had been designed a bit differently. The one on Brookendale Road, I think is designed quite nicely. So if I were to choose one of them to show, I'd give the one on Brookendale Road, because I think that looks better. So that's why I suggest taking the Speedsville Store out, even though it is and has for a long time been part of our community. It's not necessarily the standard to which all buildings should strive. Again, that's just my opinion.
My opinion about the Speedsville Store is it's a covering for the entrance, and it might go up in the first picture better, but that pump there is not a gasoline pump. It's kerosene for house heating type of thing. And that's basically why it doesn't have a canopy over it. But it's a good showing, I think, of a canopy over the entrance of a building. And I don't think you should leave Speedsville out of anything.
Well, that, and
Personally.
that was actually my sort of backing of adding it is I didn't want, I sort of want to be all inclusive of everywhere in Caroline. And the justification to put it in there was, it is an interesting entrance to a building. You don't see a lot of designs like that. I mean, it is, it does seem like a nice entrance. They have a weather cover and everything. So, but again, it's just value. And Mark, looks like you have a thought.
Yeah, I just wanted to also, I don't want to, inject myself too much into the conversation, but I think Michelle's point is really good, that it is, I have a sweet spot for the Speedsville General Store. I think it's really quaint. And so I think even if it isn't, maybe it has some engineering or, I don't know, maybe if a code inspector looked at it, he might do things differently. But I think it conveys a sense of place to me that is important. So I would like to see it in, but.
And I'm good with Ken's suggestion of using that as an example of a canopy over an entranceway. And I will tell you, having driven all over the town to get pictures for the comp plan, I also there too tried to include examples from everywhere. So I understand that sympathy. But I stand by the fact that not every building that happens to be in town is necessarily the right example of what should be in town.
Well, I also think that including Speedsville is the Speedsville General Stores is good for a number of reasons. One, I agree with the notion of it being quaint. It has a a little porch on the front. I mean, those are all the kinds of things that aren't just like a plain concrete block front. I mean, it has a lot of qualities that we're trying to encourage, but also just the notion of appealing to people throughout the town of Caroline, that we don't want all the pictures to be from Brookendale, or
Right.
for example.
Mhm.
So
Now that's extremely important that we include Speedsville if we're going to have pictures of other commercial
Yeah.
establishments.
Well, I think if it moves up and is an example of a good entryway, that sounds perfect.
Mhm.
And I could even put that as the title, like this, and say something about the entrance.
Yep.
Just
Note, under each of them, if there's something particular you're trying to show, you could say note the entryway or something.
Mark, maybe one of you folks that live down that way, there's the body shop also just off the Speedsville Commons. Is that a building that would be appropriate to have a picture of, showing the design elements we want to show?
The body shop.
Yeah, it's like Oz Motors or something like that.
So if you get to Speedsville and
Yeah,
turn,
it's right there next, adjacent to
Okay.
the Speedsville Square.
yeah, I haven't paid that much attention to it. It's sort of, it looks like it's basically a residential property that was converted or something. Actually, maybe there's also an old grocery store there that's sort of, it's a historical piece or whatever. But yeah, I'm not sure about the body shop, Bill. I just don't know.
Okay.
Another cool example, and I didn't include it in here because I felt like maybe there were enough, but is the Carson's Landscaping. That building I think is really unique because it's an old barn. So I'm not sure why I didn't even include it, but I did have a picture of it.
You know who has a drive-through canopy, now that you mention it, is Celebrations.
Wow.
That fits the character of the building.
If somebody can if somebody can get a picture of that,
I have one on my phone.
okay,
Send it to you right now.
that'd be great. All right, well, let's keep moving down. I don't want to be mindful of time. Let's say roughly 15 more minutes. But we'll take what, time we need here. So moving on down from canopies, unless there's any other thoughts, seeing none. Rooftop equipment, this could or could not be included. I think this was probably a holdover from Danby. This can be expanded to great lengths, but often on large commercial buildings, this might be something that maybe Caroline doesn't even need to worry about. I'm just going to throw that out there. But in the city of Ithaca, you can see the tops of buildings. There are often AC units and HVAC and satellite dishes and what have you. And a lot of places go through great extent to screen that equipment. So I'm not advocating either way to keep it in or not, but just providing some kind of a spectrum of thoughts on that. So this is basically that anything on the roof should not be visible from public roadways, and screening must be integral to the building design.
Personally, I don't see how you can do some of that. I can see some screening, but I can't see how you're going to make different things that might be up there, especially air conditioners or whatever, if happen to be up there. How you gonna make them invisible?
Yeah,
I
there
know that's the
are.
architect's job.
Yeah, that's the architect's job. There are a lot of ways to screen equipment. Often, this type of equipment you'll see on flat roofs. I mean, if it's a smaller, that's why I'm bringing up the scale of Caroline's development pressure. That typical small commercial developments will have air conditioner or HVAC units in the back or on the side of a building, and there can even be landscaping, that the site plan review board can require to just screen that. When these things get on tops of buildings, that's typically for a very large development. And so I think this is what the site plan is getting at, is that larger developments above 3,000 square feet that might have roofs that can support these types of equipment. It's just a precautionary measure, to add this in here. Maybe it would never be needed to be applied in Caroline. But Ken, there are ways. Okay, I'm gonna just keep moving down, and if we want to circle back to that, we can. Lighting, site and parking lot light poles should not exceed 18 feet above surrounding grade. Light fixtures should be shielded to direct light downward and contained within the site. This I debated just deleting altogether because it's covered in the site plan review law that we've gone over, but I think I might have even deleted one standard about that lighting shall not, go across property lines, but that's covered in the site plan review law pretty extensively. I think we did a good job at looking at that. So, any other thoughts on lighting? All right. Places can get very specific on these in terms of what the light fixtures actually look like. So I won't go into detail on that, being mindful of time, but maybe for a Hamlet's design guideline that you can have, if you think about a sense of place, oftentimes street lights will actually be required to be designed in a certain way. And that's very typical of a place. Parking, none of these have, yeah, Barbara.
What I don't see in this parking stuff is anything about permeability of surface. And if we care about flood control, we should specify that.
Okay, that's a good comment. Well,
take a look and see what's in the site plan review law, because there was a bunch of language in there about air escaping and permeable structures and stuff. So, yeah.
All right, I'll read through these, but I think that that is a good comment, and then a follow-up comment. Just that, yeah, if it's covered in the site plan review law, we don't want to double it up here.
Mhm.
But so I'll just read through them. Parking areas associated with the development must be located no closer to the road than the closest facade of the building unless approved by the town. If an exception is granted, parking areas located between structures and public roads are limited to a maximum of 15 spaces and should be softened with a low growing hedge and or an attractive fence or wall between the parking and the road. I'll just keep reading through these. Shared parking lots and interconnected service drives to reduce new curb cuts and maintain road safety and function should be used to the extent practicable. So that's just encouraging, yeah, just shared drives and access. Internal pedestrian, moving on to number 3, internal pedestrian connections on site from parking lots to adjacent lots, etc., must be provided as appropriate to the site to provide pedestrian access to and around the development. So we're just providing accessibility in and through the site. Large expanses of parking should be broken up with tree and shrub plantings. A vegetative buffer or fence must. Ken? Oh. Okay.
I just wondered what large means. Is that 50 spaces or more, or?
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it's a good question. This can be expanded on greatly in terms of if it's more than X amount of spaces or more than X amount of square feet for parking, you need to have 9 trees and 3 shrubs. I mean, you can get very specific. I think this sort of states it allows discretion by the review board. If the review board says that this is a large parking lot, and maybe they use, a number already referenced, it's a large parking lot, and we're going to require some trees and shrub plantings. If people think that's too squishy for folks that are on the review board, maybe it should say something of, if it's more than 25 spaces, it needs to be broken up. But it's a good question, Ken.
Ellen, any ideas?
No, I haven't seen proposals come in with a significant number of parking spaces. A better impression than the rest of you. What is, quote, large?
I could see leaving this to the discretion of the review board.
Okay.
It's obviously not going to be less than 15.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's appropriate for now, given the development pressure in Caroline, just to leave it like this. And it's, as I've said this before, but this parking is an industry in and of itself. There are actual firms that tell people how they should and shouldn't park and regulate parking. So you can get very detailed with this, and maybe it's something for a future to be looked at. This next one is new, and we had talked about this. So a vegetative buffer or fence must screen a parking area located within 20 feet of a property line.
Mhm.
Any thoughts, comments, questions?
It's what the Danby Mini Mart did when they expanded their parking lot, and they did build a fence
Mhm.
next to the adjacent property.
And I think fence, you want to maybe have some wording about how the headlights from parked cars would not go through the fence onto the adjacent property. That it'd be, a fence that would provide screening and not just a chain link fence or.
Right. Well, it does say the fence must screen a parking area already.
Yeah.
Because I'm with you, Robert. Obviously we don't want a chain link fence. That would
Yeah,
be.
that should do it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It could say must screen impacts of a parking area, but I think that could just be redundant, that
Mhm.
this can be interpreted as screening the impacts of a parking area.
Okay.
All right.
The 20 feet there What is that saying?
So
Where the
that's,
property line is 20 feet from that on the development side, or
yes,
is it, so it's leaving a 20-foot cushion between the vegetation and then the property line? Is that what you're saying?
it's saying that if parking area is located less than 20 feet to a property line, there needs to be a vegetative buffer or a fence between the parking area and the property line.
So if I understand you right, Greg, if someone built a solid wood fence right on the property line, they could have parking right up against the fence, right? That's fine. And I don't have a problem with that, but I think that's the idea.
Yeah, the way the standard is written, that's correct. Now,
Wouldn't you want that footage to be less? 10 feet?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Ken.
Well, it's located within, when I read it that it's, the vegetation is going to be within 20 feet,
Okay.
which if I was building it, I don't want to waste 20 feet of my property. If I can, in 20 feet, I think I could put spaces of parking. And I'm just thinking that the screening ought to be within 5 or 10 feet of the property line.
Okay. So Ken, that's what I tried to explain. Is my understanding that it doesn't say you have to have 20 feet of vegetation. It's saying if you want to put a parking place and that parking place is closer than 20 feet to the property boundary, then there's got to be something between the edge of the parking spot and the adjacent property. And it could be only 2 feet of distance. But as soon as that parking space intrudes within 20 feet of the edge of the property line, then you got to put something between the parking and the neighboring property. But it doesn't say how wide that area has to be. Am I understanding it right, Greg?
Correct. Yeah.
So why couldn't it, instead of 20, it be 10 feet?
No, but I think what's confusing is if a parking space was proposed 20 feet from the neighboring property, you would still have to put up some screening. You could propose your parking to be 5 feet from the property line. You would have to put up some screening. If you put it 22 feet away from the property line, you don't have to put any screening, right? So it's not that the screening has to be 20 feet away. It's that there has to be.
I understand that part.
Okay.
And Ken, did you see, I reworded, I think you brought up a good point. It may have been how the language was worded. I reworded it to say a parking area located within 20 feet of a property line must have a vegetative buffer or fence between the parking area and property line.
I think that's clear.
I think that's good, Greg.
Okay. Okay, let's move on down to, we have a couple more sections. Screening of accessory equipment. So this is very similar to the rooftop equipment. It's just saying that if there's equipment located at grades such as compactors, dumpsters, HVAC equipment, on-site utility boxes, loading docks, and other infrastructure, I could say other infrastructure needed for the development shall be screened from public roads and adjacent residential uses in a manner approved by the board. And then screening materials and design, so which relate to this, number one, must be attractive and compatible with the building and overall landscape designs. All right, any seeing no waves of the hand? I'll keep moving on. Signage. So signage, channel letter, I'll just kind of read through these. There's we'll go through these. Channel letters, halo lit letters, or downcast externally lit letters are encouraged for wall signs. Cabinet or box signs are discouraged as wall signs. So these are kind of the groups of wall signs. And I did have a question this language came from Danby's guidelines. Externally lit letters do look attractive, and so those might be, you know, where there's lights shining down on a sign or up at a sign. Often those conflict with dark sky association standards.
Mhm.
So that's why I added this word of downcast externally lit letter.
Good.
That's good.
And then just cabinet or box signs are just essentially flat-faced signs. They're kind of cheap, but again, it's just a value statement. And so if people don't care, then we can remove it or strengthen it. Again, it's another industry. It's another lots of court cases that have gone through sign ordinances. So
I have to say I'm not familiar enough with what a channel letter or a halo lit letter or a cabinet or box sign is to have any opinion.
Yep. So Dandy Mini Mart look like channel letters. So channel letters are typically, they are raised. Imagine that this is the face of a building. Channel letters, I don't know why they're named channel, but they are raised letters. Typically in standards can say even the depth. They need to be more than a ½ inch raised from the face of the building. They need to be more than an inch. So those are channel lit letters. Halo lit letters might be, here's a face of a building. There are letters that are raised above and they're sort of lit behind. They're very detailed types of signs. I doubt that anyone might propose a halo lit letter, but it's they are used. They kind of look cool. I mean, but again, it's just value based.
What's a cabinet or box sign?
Yeah, so cabinet or box signs, think of, let's see if I can think of an example. They are just essentially a big box that are completely two-dimensional on the face, that have letters that are, the letters aren't raised. There's no three-dimensional relief of the letters.
I'm thinking Dollar General signs, for example.
Yes, those are cabinet or box signs. Now,
Sure-find grocery stores have things like that.
Yep, Sure Finds, Sure Save. Yep, those all have box cabinet signs.
So you had a picture of the Livery Plaza. I don't know if you had a chance to drive by there yourself, but there's basically a sign that's a board. It's not showing in the picture you have, so you can't see their sign. I have it in a picture that I happen to take. But it basically, there's like there's a nice little planting around it, and this thing comes up, but it's just painted on this board is the name of the businesses there. Is that one of these kinds of signs?
No.
Sign?
No, because I added as wall signs.
Okay. All right, cool. Got it. Thanks.
So, and that, I had this actually before, I could just have a subsection of wall signs and then standards for ground mounted signs, because these are specific to these three are specific to ground mounted signs. And then these two are specific to wall signs. So
okay, I mean, it was my inattentive reading, but it probably would make it more clear if you said wall signs and ground mounted signs as two separate sections.
Mhm.
I don't know how other people feel. But.
I think I did that because the picture made it difficult to have very narrow text, but I can get creative. So. But let's just move on. Let's keep moving down. Any other thoughts on designs of signs? Yeah.
Can we talk about size?
So good question. This does not talk about size at all. And so sign regulations per Supreme Court can regulate time, place, and manner. So they cannot regulate content. So you can have a sign ordinance that regulates everything under the sun except for what the sign actually says. So size is appropriate. You could say there are no signs allowed ground mounted that are over 100 square feet or 50 square feet. You could absolutely say that. So none of these standards say anything about size.
Couldn't the wall mounted also have size?
Absolutely.
Greg, could you just do a little bit of research this week and give us some proposals for size?
Sure.
Since,
One of the things that should be considered is not just, they shouldn't be too big, but sometimes the signs are so small that you can't read while you're driving along and you're trying to, so it's you want it in between.
Yeah, I can do that, Tim, and I think maybe what you're alluding to is that we should be mindful of time here, just kind of move on, and that the sign standards area of regulation for a town is it's a very appropriate place to put in a zoning ordinance, because they can be expanded on to great lengths, and there can be separate manuals on sign standards if needed. So I'll do some basic preliminary research, but I'm not going to go into too much depth because it is going to come down to just sort of, again, value based.
right.
So again, ground mounted signage should be externally illuminated and downcast if using lighting. Ample landscaping must be provided at the base of the signs. Digital signs, including LCD signs with changing, moving, or flashing text are prohibited. All right. Keep moving down. Landscaping, very short section. Again, it could be expanded on to a great degree, but landscaping should enhance the site and screen undesirable features from view. So that can be interpreted broadly.
Yeah.
Yes, Barbara.
Right.
I would just add to that, should muffle undesirable noises as well. Because I think landscaping can do that.
Can it? I don't really know. I like the idea, but I'm not sure. You know?
Not effective.
Yeah. Practically not really, unless it was a large expanse of woods or,
Yeah.
but like a hedgerow won't. Typically landscaping is just for visual purposes.
Mhm.
You know, if you're concerned about noise issues, I think you have to have sort of baffled walls and things like they do along highways sometimes. I don't even know if those work.
Not really.
My sense.
Yeah.
I would suggest just keeping it to the visual features.
Okay. All right. Seeing no other thoughts. Last section is just called Sustainable Transportation Infrastructure. This was this was in the former design guidelines as a question, and so restated, it's the development is encouraged to provide, to the extent possible, support for transportation choices such as bike racks and/or storage, dedicated car share parking spaces, a car or van pooling service, electric vehicle charging stations, or local public transportation infrastructure for persons with disabilities.
Where's pedestrian stuff? Is that elsewhere?
It's not in here. That should be covered in the site plan review law, I think, in general. It should be.
It's also covered in the parking section in relationship to adjacent parking lots.
Right. But
All right. Any other follow-up thoughts? I think there's still, just a little bit of, work to do on this. But we've been confirmed, we don't need, there's no kind of rush on this right now. It's just sort of to be worked on and yeah. I mean,
So next week, I think what we can do is spend a little bit of time in a meeting going through the final approvals for site plan, and this, it shouldn't be that time consuming, so we get them ready.
Yeah.
And then what I'd like to do for the rest of the night, if we're at a transition point, since we don't have that much time left, is have Greg just start to introduce us into thinking about zoning options, and then I'd like to spend next week thinking about that together in a little bit more detail. None of that would be at all detailed like this, because the first thing that's required if you even begin to consider zoning is that the town establish a zoning commission, which basically starts from scratch. However, the detailed work that has been done on site plan and design standards is clearly just, if it weren't passed, if there were zoning, it wouldn't be passed as a separate law. If there's no zoning, it could be passed as a separate law at the end of the moratorium extension quite easily. If there were zoning, it's ready to be wrapped right into it, and all of the work has been done in great detail. So I think we're in great shape. Ellen?
Are we, when are we going to talk about what we think we're going to hand to the town board?
I thought that's what we did at the beginning, but Greg, you just want to pick that up in terms of the report?
Sure. Yeah. So, Alan, what we're planning to do, I sent out the outline for the report yesterday, and the intention is to submit a report to the town board in advance of their December 1st meeting. So I was thinking that I would prepare that this week, send it to everyone at the end of this week by Friday at the latest, and then everyone can review it for our meeting next week. And then I can work on it during the holiday week and submit it, back to you all for a final look over. But it sounds like from Tim that maybe if there's still might need to be work on it, if there's other outstanding comments, that maybe the December 9th meeting would be sort of a catch-all date, but we should just shoot for December 1. And so this report, maybe we just start there. We didn't hear anybody's comments on the outline, but essentially it's just providing what the charge of the task force is, what we researched, what our findings were from our research topics. I want to pull it up here so everyone can see, and then what our short-term and long-term recommendations are.
And will our short and long-term recommendations include our proposed site plan review law changes?
Sure.
Yeah. So can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. So, and let me get rid of that language.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So starting with a short executive summary, the purpose and background of the task force. And please feel free if I should, be expanding on this, but there was, a moratorium. I could talk about the comprehensive plan and the appointment of the task force, the findings of the task force. So in general, some of the larger topics that we were charged to research. And then, Ellen, this is where this section I would reference in an appendix, and that would be the site plan and design standards. And zoning, which we haven't talked in great detail of, but it's been sort of brought up at various points as just a way that might be able to strengthen these types of restrictions.
Greg, what's your thinking on why order it this way? Why do formula business restrictions, then economic impact, and so on? And the reason I'm asking is just that the site plan review and design standards seem to be the most substantive piece, in terms of the most content. And so I'm just wondering why leave that towards the end? Is there a reason for this order?
Are you talking about the order within number 3?
Yes.
Yeah, my thought was that this is kind of just a little bit of a chronological order. I felt that we had started initially with looking at formula business restrictions. We did break off into our subgroups, but from what I gathered about our discussions is that this will be a fairly short section, the formula business restrictions. based on the research that we did and where we landed. And then further down, yes, this would be much more expansive than formula business restrictions. Economic impact review, there's still interest in pursuing some type of impact review. So I guess to your point, the thought behind the order was just, I think they might have even be listed this way in our charge, but it might be going from least discussed or sort of that don't need a lot of discussion down to things that might need a little bit more discussion. But
Gee, if you switched 3.1 and 3.2, it would be alphabetical.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking from the perspective of a reader and the order of what the executive summary would be. I mean, often the executive summary is really honing in on what's the key do now kind of recommendation, and then what's the future recommendations, and then what are the things that we kind of didn't go into in depth or don't think are appropriate. And so if the executive summary is going to say what you need to do now is to pass the site plan review law revisions and the design standard revisions, then you start off with that in the findings. So I guess I'm just trying to think through the reasoning for why it appears in this order. That's all. And there's not a right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand what the reasoning is in making a choice.
With you that you might as well put the strong suit forward. So I don't know whether it would be a problem to put 3.3 as the first. But I don't feel strongly, but it seemed like it might make sense because people get tired of reading.
I recommend that we think about this, chew on this, and return to it later. I might mention, by the way, just looking at it, that Greg, I don't think that there's a need to have a moratorium section. That's just a separate issue, and it's a town board issue.
No, I think it was the
Really?
previous moratorium.
Pardon me?
I think that was referring to the history, that there was a moratorium.
Right, but I don't think we need to have that in our report. I mean, I just think it'll be cleaner without it.
okay.
And I'm unclear, we haven't really discussed, have we, the short and long-term recommendations?
Right, that was exactly what I was going to say as well, but I think that that's probably not for today. But I'm wondering, is that settled already what those are?
No, I'd like us to today, just for the remaining time, just to have Greg give us a short overview of how we might approach discussing zoning next week. And then obviously we're going to talk about short and long-term recommendations in a week or two, right? Does that sound reasonable?
Right. So I just want to clarify. So those, there's not a set list already in short and long term. That's what we're going to develop in a week or two.
Yes.
Okay. That's all I was asking.
Ideally, yes, sooner than later, I think. And so leading into a discussion on zoning, because
I think Ken had a question.
oh, all right,
Ken?
I can't.
Did you have a question, Ken?
Yeah, the formula business restrictions. Did we actually come up with some, or do we actually in the site plan have commercial development guidelines?
That would be my question also.
My understanding is that the subcommittee on formula business restrictions reported on it and recommended that zoning would be a more appropriate envelope for such a thing. So the subcommittee didn't recommend a separate law for commercial or for formula business restrictions outside of the comfort of zoning.
Well, and the site plan review law, no? We address formula business there, don't we?
Yeah.
But not as a restriction.
Right. And the point is that formula business restrictions are a category now that trigger site plan review, regardless of size. That's fine, but there aren't, and all recommendations there apply to all commercial businesses, not special ones just for formula businesses. That's what Tim's saying. I think that is appropriate outside of zoning. That's really what seemed to be able to stick. So yes, their form of business appear in the site plan review, but not with any special restrictions that don't apply to any other commercial business. And if you need that, to do that, you really would need zoning.
Michelle?
Well, so then that category of formula business restrictions in your table of contents seems misleading to me because we didn't actually come up with restrictions.
It was a recommended tool that we consider. It was one of the tools that the town board
I see.
consider as a recommendation that's also recommended in the revised comprehensive plan as a possibility. So that's why we honed in.
Okay.
Right. So what that section would say is that this was looked at and decided that if it were to be pursued, it would be wise to first have zoning and then pursue it. Something like along those lines, right, Tim?
That would be my understanding.
But perhaps also refer to that it will be addressed through the site plan review. It won't be restrictions specifically for formula businesses, but it's addressing formula businesses.
As a trigger. The formula business is a trigger, yes. Is that right? Is that what you meant, Ellen?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of take it from there and bring up a little bit more of zoning. And we have talked about it for the last couple of months here and there in bringing up formula business restrictions, economic impact review, site plan and design review. And I've generally been framing it as, probing questions about, have there been places that don't have zoning that also use these types of land use guidance to kind of help us understand that where is zoning, appropriate? Does it even need to be considered? We heard from Joan at Tompkins County, who said that, zoning may or may not be necessary for Caroline, but she also said that it could be very, very basic. And so what I did, I just jotted a few things down where I'm not going to necessarily advocate for it, but from our conversations, a number of topics have come up, such as residential development in town, the density of residential development, the spacing of residential development as one thing, the look of commercial buildings, even just the location of commercial buildings, setbacks. We've heard a lot about setbacks from sensitive areas. We've heard about certain natural resources, floodplains, wetlands, sensitive areas. These could be called overlay zones in a zoning district. And even things such as lighting. We were getting into a discussion about lighting last week and not wanting, some people said they didn't want to be near commercial uses that have excessive lighting. And so that would be something where a zoning would strengthen that separation of those uses. And so from what I've heard in our discussions, I've been trying to take the approach of, is there a way that zoning is just not, we don't even need to look at zoning. We can do this another way from what I've heard with the task force in the areas that are of concern. But based on the conversations we've had, it does seem that zoning would help to create a framework for these topics, these topics to be regulated and appropriately administered in the town. I think what might be helpful, because it is maybe just a question and answer session from people. I think I do have a number of other readings that I've pulled down. I don't know how exhausted people are from just reading things, but it might be useful because we've read a couple of things on zoning, such as adopting zoning for the first time, although that is something that's to be used maybe in a later step. We haven't looked at a publication about pros and cons of zoning or something about, we've heard a lot about protecting agricultural resources in the town, and New York State has a number of different advocacies for using zoning in agricultural protection districts. agricultural protection zone districts to protect agricultural resources and say specifically, these types of uses are not allowed in an agricultural zone. You can't do that without zoning. If we want to fully protect an agricultural zone, regardless of whether it has certain resources that are defined in the site plan review or not, they can just be delineated via a zoning map and to say whether they're allowed or not.
Well, it seems to me that I believe that the people on this task force would agree that the town ought to look into zoning. I don't think, I haven't heard anybody suggest otherwise.
Well, I suggest otherwise. I'm against the zoning,
And why is that, Ken?
just so that you know, I'm against zoning.
Why?
Well, because just now he's talking about agricultural zoning. It depends on how it is set up. And when because I hear us talking about the whole town being zoned in some way. We're talking mostly about commercial uses. And I can see where zoning this area or that area for commercial use. And I believe that the people in that area have to be strongly for it. There are a majority of people that I've talked with, that doesn't mean I've talked with everybody, but a majority of don't want any zoning in this area. I think the site plan does a good job of protecting mostly everybody. And when we talk about the economic standards, and we want to be pleasing to all the economic standards that we have a lot more less economic, well-off people than we do people that are well-off economically. And as far as the farming goes, farmers begin to feel that, oh, now they're taking our land away from us. They haven't paid us anything for it. I don't know if that helps you out or not, Ellen, but
But
I was.
I
Those
think you
are-
raised. I think Ken
zoning
raised-
to me is very controlling.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, Ken, when I said about agricultural zoning, let me be clear. Zoning is agriculture is regulated by New York State. Zoning cannot conflict with agricultural protected by New York State. An agricultural protection zone, an example would be saying only agriculture is allowed in this zone. No commercial businesses, no apartment buildings, no condo units, just agriculture. It can be as simple as allowing one use, which is agriculture. And many towns where I work in Cuyahoga County say that. We have 3 zones. We have agriculture, residential, and commercial. Agriculture, you get one use, agriculture, great. Residential, where you can allow, and then they sort of break it down into residential uses. That is an agricultural protection zone because it is saying there are no other uses whatsoever allowed currently right now in Caroline. The site plan law has been strengthened to a degree about discussing agricultural resources not being impacted. But currently right now in Caroline, essentially any use can be developed anywhere, conceivably. And then with the site plan review law, that's where it gets specific into looking at the actual what's on the ground and how the land functions with species of concern and agricultural resources and wetlands of that. But right now, Caroline cannot restrict commercial from being on an agricultural piece of property. And so I think it might help to send around an example or two of very simple basic zoning ordinances in places that are even more rural than Caroline, to show just some examples of how they're set up. Because I've just heard some of the topics that we've heard about making sure things don't conflict between commercial practices, business practices, residential, peace and enjoyment, and agricultural uses, so that agricultural uses are not impacted by other commerce of the town. Bill, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I think Ken brings up some good points, because the concern that I often hear from, I don't want to say they're all farmers, but from some of the folks out there that are still trying to make some money farming or other rural uses is that one of the ways they have to pay taxes is to sell off a fraction of the acreage to turn it into a residential lot. So it seems to me that the agricultural zone doesn't have to prohibit that activity. So sort of my question to Ken is, are there things we could agree on that would not be appropriate, like that you should not build an industrial facility in an agricultural area? But maybe if the zoning allowed a certain amount of residential development in the ag area, that would be acceptable to the people that you've been talking to. What would you think they would say to that, Ken?
I would say that that's a better possibility, because that's what we're afraid of, is that you say that's all you can do. We have to have a way to, if we're going to stay in business, to do it economically. And right now, it's not economical to be a dairy person. It's not real economical to be a crop person. This year happens to be a good year for me, but you get a wet year and that'll drown me. So it would depend also if you zoned my whole farm. I got pieces of ground that you wouldn't make anything but the goldenrod grow if you put 5 tons of lime on the acre. So but I've paid taxes on it all this time. So I think what you're saying is, I agree with you. That ground there, I'd like to sell it, but I'm not ready to. Does that answer your question, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
So
a tough thing we do talk about more. But Ellen had what she wanted to say.
What I wanted to say was,
no,
we're not trying to decide what the zoning ordinance might look like if we have one.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to say to the town board is, there's enough interest that we should look at the possibility of zoning. And I think I was comforted by Joan's presentation that it can be pretty simple. And it could be as simple as commercial development that isn't related to agriculture is going to be limited. And it could be as simple as there are several hamlets and we want to encourage those to be a node where commercial, pedestrian, whatever takes place. So I think there's enough interest that we need to at least look at zoning and suggest to the town board that zoning be a tool that we investigate. Doesn't mean we know what it's going to look like, doesn't mean we think it's a definite, but I think we need to look at it.
Barbara?
I agree with Ellen, but I just want to emphasize that one thing that kept coming up was this issue of the 3 hamlets as growth poles. That if we want to see commercial activity concentrated in the hamlets, from what Greg said all along, we have to consider zoning. And it could be, if we could do it in such a way that leaves things as open as possible for the rural land, but encourages economic development around the hamlets, that could be useful.
One of the things that I've come to appreciate over the past few months, having read all of these reports and laws and everything, is that I'm now concerned that, I mean, I think it might be possible to begin to think of zoning not in terms of restriction, but in terms of empowerment of the town. And the site plan and design guidelines that we've come up with will be a lot more defensible if it has that legal envelope around it. I mean, that's become quite clear. So one of the things that I think we should talk about this more next week, but I'd encourage us to think about maybe to try to shift the way that zoning as a concept has been traditionally considered in the town. I totally understand the anxiety and resistance to restriction, but zoning can also be empowerment to the town in relationship to the outside pressures that might come to bear in the near future. And all of our surrounding counties have adapted that empowerment. So it just might be some of this might be a matter of comfort and semantics, but it's also, I mean, I can't imagine any of us on this task force, having done all the work that we can, recommending some kind of highly restrictive suburban zoning plan. I mean, I think that what we'd imagine is something very simple that would help support us legally, right, to reasonably carry out the kinds of things that the subcommittee has just articulated. But maybe I'd like to take Greg up on his proposal just to send us a couple of readings, and then it would be good just to talk this through more casually, because I don't think anybody who's been in this town for a long time is going to be surprised to hear that there are citizens who would have been vehemently opposed to zoning as a concept. But I think we maybe need to, it'll help to educate ourselves a little bit more about what that concept could be. And so let's break for the evening. This has been really great. We're basically through the design and site plan revisions, which are fabulous. And then we can talk more about some of these details next week. Does that sound like a good plan, Ken?
Looks like.
Ken?
Well, okay, but I would disagree with the fact that many people in the town, not the majority of the people in the town, the ones that have been here for a long time, I believe are adamantly opposed to zoning. I've been here some 40 years. There are people that would want zoning. I don't doubt that, but it's not such a great group that someone can say many people. It's many more people disagree with zoning.
Well,
Thank you.
I think that probably our job is not to worry about the public opinion. That's the town board's job. I mean, our job as a task force is just to consider the nature of the tool and decide whether we want to recommend to the town board to pursue consideration of a tool or not. It's really not, there's no way we're going to get, as a task force, get into determining public opinion about this. But that certainly the town board would have to do that. And I mean, but what I'd like to do is keep focus on the tool next week.
Good.
And on how the tool might relate to the work that we've already done.
And I agree with you, Tim. I guess my point was simply that, yeah, understanding what the tool is, the reading is a great idea, because I think understanding what the tool is might help. I think a lot of people have an idea of what zoning is and means, which may not, sometimes is accurate, sometimes isn't. And I think that there's some flexibility in what zoning is, so that maybe we can come to a place where most of the people in town at least will be happy. That's my hope, at least.
Right.
But not our job, I agree.
Okay, we've had a long, another really productive night. This is an incredible task force. I mean, I couldn't have imagined a more productive and thoughtful group of people to be doing this work. It's really important work for the town, and the town board is it's gonna be so much help to us. So let's, with Greg's help, carry on this discussion next week, tie up the loose ends. Maybe at the very beginning, we'll tie up the loose ends with the site plan and design, just so we can wrap that up. Shouldn't take that long. And then work through this discussion, and then we can start thinking towards how we want to move forward. Okay.
Very good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Have a great night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
See you
Thank you all.
next week.
See you. Mark, you're going to stop recording?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.